My name is Zach, and I'm your mental load coach. Today, I'm here to talk to you about what default parenting is. What is it? What are some examples of where I've seen it, worked with other couples on not letting that happen, some metaphors that would really help us understand, and mistakes and misconceptions that we have about it. Hey there, before we jump into the default parenting education for today, I want to invite you to check out the link below on the free school community. Free school community is called Mental Load Basics. The purpose of it is to better understand mental load, improve the way that you're looking at things, and have a place where you can talk with like-minded people that are working on implementing the fair play method and trying to better understand the mental load within their home such that they are becoming a more equitable partnership. Okay, we'll get to some default parenting. So real quick, what is default parenting? So default parenting is typically when we're letting our gender roles within society dictate where we end up within the home. It's also usually dependent on work and paid labor that we're doing and what flexibility that we have for doing those things and how we're letting labor happen in our home based off of those job responsibilities. So for example, if I'm in a sales position and I make more of the money, the gender roles in our society would tell us that I have the most important job bringing in money, and that whatever my wife does, as long as I'm making more money than her, is more important than what she's doing. So that would be an example of where falling to gender norms is kind of where that's happening. The other place I think that it shows up very frequently is when we're not talking really specifically about how and where and when and how we want things to show up in our home. So if one person is typically doing some specific chore and we're not talking about who owns that chore because it's something that needs to happen in the house, if that person is just doing it because they see that it needs to get done, they're typically doing it, and we're not talking about ownership of that, especially when it comes to managing our children, teaching them things, helping them grow, that would be default parenting. I think the last aspect of why default parenting is a thing is because there's so many places in our world where parenting and or emotional labor and mental load are invisible and they're not valued. And because those things are not valued, we are in turn allowing so much more of that work to land on one person because it's not seen as hard to do or it's not valued. And so because it's not valued, because it's not seen as challenging, we're like, oh, we'll just dump it all on this person, no big deal, because it's not that heavy in the first place. So I want to start off, part of the reason I'm making this video is something that happened last night in our house, as well as something that happened this morning. It started the morning before. My wife was feeling a little sick, not feeling 100%, and she asked if she could kind of lay in bed. I knew she was struggling with some things, and so I said, yeah, I got it. No worries. That was a great example of it not just defaulting to one of us, but us sort of discussing how we wanted to be with our toddler. And so I took over parenting for most of the day. I think she woke up about 7:30 and I was out there with her. We often start off with cartoons on a weekend morning. We did some of that. We did some playing, making sure, she's still in potty training mode. We ended up going to the library, trying to make sure that she got at least a little bit of a nap because she's typically has a much easier rest of the day if she gets at least some amount of a nap. I managed most of that aspect of it. From there, when I got home, I cooked dinner, we ate all together, and then we turned the TV off, started playing a bit, and there was a moment where I recognized I somewhat purposefully didn't get up to continue playing with them. So they were running around with blankets as capes, and at one point saying, Mommy, do this thing with me. I was playing sort of a supporting role in this role play, and I didn't get off the bed. And so in that moment, because I actively chose, I'm just going to chill here on my phone, Alyssa's got this. That was definitely a moment where I allowed what was happening to default over to Alyssa. And I think part of it was that I was sort of feeling like I put in my work for the day. She's had plenty of time to rest for 7:30. We were probably going about 10 hours. And I just wanted a break, but I didn't bring that up. I didn't ask for it. Instead, I let that default to Alyssa, which led to upset. And we, I think both hurt each other. She voiced this, I got defensive, and I pushed back on it, and so that didn't go well. Fast forward to the next day, and what we've historically been better at least in the last couple months, even the last year, is when our toddler gets sick, is talking about, okay, what needs to be done for her and for the home, what need to be done for our work. So me as a full-time coach, entrepreneur, managing a business, and for her in her remote work. What things do we need to do? And so we talked about it this morning, and what we'll often say is, can we divide the workday into two pieces where I'll get 4 hours, she'll get 4 hours total. I remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I ended up having a 4-hour chunk in the middle of the day, and she had 2 at the beginning and 2 at the end, which worked out well for both of us. So that was an example of where we saw defaulting could have happened, and because we talked about it ahead of time, it didn't become a default session of me just prioritizing the business, again, because gender stereotypes and our cultural roles would say that I have the more correlative money-making opportunity, therefore all activities that have to do with that should come first. And that is something that we've been actively participating in, not letting that default. So one of my favorite metaphors to talk about on this is the example of the Netherlands and organ donation. So in America, especially, I don't know if it's especially, but at least in Massachusetts, when you go to get your driver's license, when you go to check the box for the things you want, one of the options is organ donation. There is a empty checkbox that you have to check off to say, yes, I want to be an organ donor. And in the Netherlands, it is the reverse. So in the Netherlands, the reverse is you are an organ donor unless you would like to not be. Organ donation, I'm going to double check. In America. Hey, where'd that go? Donation in America. Oh dear. Oh, my internet just went out. That's weird. Yeah, that's weird. So I'm going to do this without internet for a minute. So it is significantly lower. I believe it's 70, 80, 90% up there for what the percent of registered voters, of people with licenses that have organ donating as like their thing. So that means about, I swear it was in the 90s, but there's a much smaller amount of people that actively opted out of it. And similarly, because it took opting into it in America, we have a significantly way lower amount of organ donors. So that's an example of where we choose to have something by default, and if we don't want it to be default, like just the way that we have the question posed. And so oftentimes we end up falling into gender roles, gender stereotypes, the way that has been laid out for decades before us. And that is typically impacting the way that we go about default parenting in our homes, is based on those roles. So it takes active conversations to talk about with our partner to not let that happen. And another example of where there's a default setting is and I know that this has changed over time, is Apple and Google and Facebook and Meta tracking our data and tracking our information. So I know that today, when you download a new app, it usually asks you, would you like this person to be able to track your data? And you can choose yes or no. So they've changed it from something that used to be a default to tracking it to no longer being a default, that they're just tracking it and that you have to go into the settings and adjust it. So a huge part of this metaphor is that if we want to have it not be a default setting in our home, we need to have a conversation. We need to go into the system preferences and say, hey, this is how I want things to actually go. This is how I want to actually make adjustments to the way that we have our default settings in the home. So some mistakes and misconceptions. One is that knowing this language and saying someone's a default parent does not actually solve the problem. You have to be able to go into the conversation. You have to look at what are the current settings that we have right now, which is when I get home from work, someone is, Alyssa is typically the one, managing her toddler. I would say right now our default settings are, so we talked about these ahead of time. I do drop off in the morning, and she does pick up in the afternoon. That's what we talked about. The current defaults that we have that we haven't talked a ton about is if she comes back, she usually goes to a library after. If they're headed to the library that's 5 minutes from us, she might say, hey, can I come pick you up and we can all go as a family? If it's a different library, she's usually going to just go there and she'll typically communicate about it. I'm often trying to adjust my hours so that if they do come back, I will have the opportunity to go with them. Similarly, in the morning, it had been defaulting that we end up on the couch. Recently, our toddler has been wanting to cuddle with us in bed, so it has changed into her coming into the bed with us and cuddling in there. We've already talked about and not defaulted to having me be the owner of creating lunches. However, we have not talked about who the owner and or default is about getting our toddler ready for the day. It has defaulted to Alyssa, but these are a bunch of the small default settings that we've just allowed to happen as our toddlers had preferences and we've managed them in the moment, and then we've gotten into a groove. When I say groove, not necessarily a good thing, just like a habit. So default, I would argue there are moments where she's default parenting based on our toddler's preferences, and that is going to be a consistent effort of how do we manage this, how do we actually want it to go, rather than just what is the way that it's going. I'm gonna pause right here. I know I'm finishing this video in another day, that's why I'm wearing different clothes. So the last two things I want to talk about, some realizations, and then I want to share answers some of your questions. So one of the realizations that Alyssa and I had when we were working on implementing the Fair Play method, when we just moved into our other house, which is not this living location, is that we had put her desk in the middle of the living room. And when we did that, I was in a new sales job. We put my desk and my computer setup behind a closed door in a place where our toddler could not reach. And so what we did was we effectively made her the default parent by physical location. So when our toddler was playing downstairs, even when her grandparents were over, our parents had come over to be with her, Alyssa was still in the living room. She was still in a place where she was going to become the default parent that she was easily reachable for, versus because I was upstairs, like a set of stairs, and I was behind a door, like that made me less of the default parent because of the different levels of access that our toddler had to us. So when we think about how we close doors, who's the first person that's on the call list from the school when someone needs to get picked up, those kind of settings are actually really consequential to the way that default parenting happens in your home. And so last questions I want to kind of respond to here that I've been asked before. How do I know if my partner is the default partner? And what I would say, I think a really simple one that answers the majority of the situations. In the Fair Play method up here, one of the cards is called Glitch in the Matrix. And what that means is if there's a sick toddler, like today, our toddler is home sick, she had a fever, who is picking up the slack? Where is that immediate change in schedule happening? And so one of the things we've been working on is that morning whenever we make the decision, like, okay, she can't go to preschool/daycare, is we'll say, okay, what does your schedule look like? What does my schedule look like? Who's going to manage? Who's kind of taking a sick day? Who's taking sick hours, if you will, and going to be less productive? Now, I acknowledge we are in a place of privilege. We both work from home. So what we kind of decided was, okay, it's like I'll get 4 hours, you'll get 4 hours-ish. Oftentimes we will prioritize my job a little bit more than hers. Sometimes we'll prioritize hers over mine, depending on what things we have going on. So I'd say when there's a sick child, who is going to be picking up that labor if there's no conversation had. And I would say we've gotten really good at having those conversations. And if we don't, I would argue that it falls on Alyssa more than it falls on me. Having said that, that is why we aim to consistently have conversations about where we want that labor to go when she is homesick. The other question is, what assumptions am I leaving up for defaulting? I would say the assumptions that are showing up is whose time is more valuable. And again, coming back to the fair play method is talking about the toxic time messages. So a huge one living in a capitalistic society is time is money. And so when we say time is money, we're often looking at who has the higher paying job, who has the ability to take more sick time off, whose work is more valuable. And those are some of the things that we're assuming, one, from our cultural expectations that men's jobs are more important because they're the providers of the family. That is slowly becoming outdated as we continue progressing and getting closer towards the gender pay gap. There are plenty of clients that I work with where the woman makes more money than the man, and their jobs are more important than the guys in terms of providing financially for a home. So I think looking at the toxic time messages are a fantastic place to look at where some of those assumptions are, because I think those assumptions are some of those underlying ones that are going to help you recalibrate what's going on and how your decision making is happening. If you made it through this, I hope that you feel significantly more attuned to the concept of default parenting. I'm hoping that you feel like you have some better language and or some examples to draw from and looking at what exists in your home. If this is something that you're working on, is fighting the default parenting, fighting some of the gender norms that you and your partner have probably fallen into, I would highly encourage, as I said at the beginning of the video, to join my free community. Link is going to be in bio. If you are looking for support, if you're looking for consistent hours that you can be talking with me, working through these things, implementing the fair play method, that is what the Mental Load Mastery community is for. And that is not free. So I can put both links in there if you want to check out either or both. I would highly encourage getting into the free one. We have almost weekly webinars that can give you some free advice, get a little bit of FaceTime with me. Sometimes I will have experts come on and share some of the things that they're working on with people. I've been working a lot with connection codes lately. Is going to be a space for growth and talking about emotions and articulating them and working through them with families. So highly recommend checking out at least the free community. If not, if you're looking for support, there's Mental Load Mastery as well. They're getting some really good results in there. I will look forward to seeing you in other places, and I hope you learned something today. Share this with another guy that might need to hear it, and or share this with a woman that you think could also share this. I aim to be palatable. I aim to be someone that people can come to, and a lot of guys can come to and not feel like they're being yelled at. I'm trying to do some of the emotional labor that I know my wife did for me, that a lot of women have done for me. And trying to just give it a different looking voice to some of that same messaging. And I really try to credit a lot of the people that taught me along the way. Fair play was a huge impact on how I think about a lot of these things. So thank you, and look forward to sharing with you more soon.